screen here. All right. So today we're going to be talking about the fiscal year 2025, we just rang in the new year on October 1st for the federal government. So can everybody see the presentation view as well? I think, yes, okay. So we'll be talking about the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, specifically the Agricultural Land Easements Program Option, or ACEP-ALE. You might hear ACEP-ALE. It's the same thing that I am referring to. I usually try to say ALE. And I introduced myself earlier, but for the recording, my name is Matt Penberthy. I'm the Agricultural Land Easement Program Coordinator with COLT and NRCS here in Oregon. So again, this workshop is being recorded and will be available on the COLT website after this meeting, and we'll also share out the slides as well in an email and on our website. So the purpose of today's workshop is to provide prospective entity applicants. So that's a term that I'll be using that refers to easement holders, which could include a land trust, SWCD, or others that I'll talk about more here soon. And we will talk about the below topics. This workshop will not cover in-depth other NRCS sources of funding, that including the Inflation Reduction Act funding that was presented in a previous workshop, which is also available on the COLT website, and happy to talk about that off this meeting if there are any questions. We will also not be covering in any major detail some specific program options. So that includes the grasslands of special environmental significance or the buy, protect, sell option as well. So the specific topics we'll be talking about is giving some context and presenting the application cutoff date for this fiscal year. We will be talking about eligibility. So the landowner and entity eligibility criteria. We'll talk about ranking criteria and how applications are scored. We'll talk about how to submit an application, and I'll give a bit of a process overview as well, and then we'll have time for question and answer. I may pause as well in the middle for some Q&A. I'm going to take out my phone so I pay attention to the time here and see where we're at, if there is a good time to pause. So to start out with the ACEP-ALE context and cutoff date. First, of course, some may know that ACEP is a parent program that has two components, the agricultural land easements and the wetlands reserve easements, or WRE. And we're just talking about ALE today. So it's the program option that keeps working lands available for agriculture by protecting the farm uses or protecting grazing uses of grasslands and related conservation values. In the ALE program, NRCS can provide up to 50% of a cost share assistance for the purchase of these types of easements. And then even further within the GSS program option, or grasslands of special environmental significance, NRCS can provide up to 75% of cost share assistance for the purchase of that type of easement that meets that GSS eligibility. There are matching funds required for the remaining cost share of the easement. Those come from the entity, and they may originate from a variety of sources, including philanthropic foundation grants, private donations. The landowner can also donate the land value remaining. And there are also state government grants available. Like Carson mentioned, the Oregon Agriculture Heritage Program is a newly formed, designed to be a match for ACEP-ALE in Oregon, and that's ran by the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. So for fiscal year 25, under the General ACEP-ALE pool, NRCS Oregon received $1.1 million from National NRCS. NRCS Oregon may be able to receive additional funding through what's called a funds assessment process. This process is conducted by National at certain points throughout the fiscal year, and our fiscal year runs October 1st, 2024 through September 31st, 2025. So essentially, if we have more applications that have a higher federal share request than NRCS Oregon has, so if it's greater than 1.1 million, if those applications are eligible, we may be able to get additional funding to fund those applications. And I want to give another reminder that the Inflation Reduction Act is a separate pot of funding for Oregon. This is brand new to Oregon this fiscal year as well. And I talked a lot more about that in a previous COLT webinar. And so I recommend tuning into that if you have any questions. So the application cutoff date for fiscal year 25, some context for this is that NRCS, we do accept applications on a continuous basis. However, NRCS typically establishes cutoff dates to batch applications each fiscal year. And this is due to, it allows NRCS to align better with national processes in terms of like how the steps to actually process an application. And also that funds assessment process. Like I mentioned, there are specific dates where national assesses the funds around all of the states. And so having a cutoff date allows the states to fall in line a bit better with those dates as well. It also helps ensure that applications are ranked fairly and competitively. And then for fiscal year 25, the application cutoff date is November 29th, 2024 at 5 p.m. Pacific. And just a reminder that the fiscal year 25 Inflation Reduction Act funding, that is a separate pot of funding, as I just mentioned, and has a separate cutoff date of December 20th at 5 p.m. Pacific. That date is set by national. So the NRCS Oregon team does not have flexibility in shifting that date or realigning it with our general ACEP funding application date. So let's move into eligibility. This is information that I did not really get to cover well at the Inflation Reduction Act workshop. I mostly wanted to focus on IRA priorities there. So this is a much deeper dive than the previous workshop. We'll start out with land eligibility. The land, of course, has to be private or tribal land that is agricultural land, such as a farm or a ranch. It also must meet one of the following criteria. So the land trust and the landowner decide which of these fit their project best. And there are specific criteria that it has to meet if you select one of these categories. So it could have prime, unique, or farmland of statewide important soils. This is documented in Web Soil Survey, which is explained, or it's how to use Web Soil Survey is explained in the application packet in more detail, and to be able to pull that information out. The property could also contain historical or archaeological resources. Enrolling the land would protect grazing uses or related conservation values by restoring or conserving eligible land is another category. And then the last category of eligibility is that protecting the land would further a state or local policy consistent with the purposes of ACEP. And in Oregon, given our land use laws, I kind of categorize or vision this last category, number 4 here, as more of a catch-all if the land isn't meeting any of the prior 3 categories to apply under, given, as I said, that we have specific land use laws that are kind of unique compared to other states. Land also must be in one of the following uses, at least one of the following uses, sorry. So it could be cropland, rangeland, pasture land, grassland, or land that contains forbs or shrubs for which grazing is a predominant use. It could be land that is located in an area that has been historically dominated by grasslands or related plants. And it could also be non-industrial private forest land that contributes to the economic viability of an offered parcel, or it serves as a buffer to protect such land from development. So a little bit more on land eligibility here. In policy, it's written that the land should face development pressure from non-agricultural uses, but in practice, this is just used as ranking criteria to evaluate the project. And then similarly, it's written in policy that the land must be in an area with access to agricultural markets or infrastructure. But in practice, this is evaluated again as a ranking criteria. The last thing regarding land eligibility is that it must have a written pending offer from the entity for the purchase of the easement that must be available and provided to NRCS. So moving on to landowner eligibility and the Farm Service Agency. We'll talk more about that on the next slide. With landowner eligibility, the land must be owned by an individual, an entity such as like a farm business, whether that's an LLC or a general partnership or a tribe. If not, these individuals or entities must have a current written purchase agreement to buy the parcel of land as well. All producers or entities such as, like I mentioned, the trust or farm business, LLC, partnership, must have Farm Service Agency records established and meet eligibility requirements set out by FSA to participate in all NRCS programs. So some of that filed paperwork include CCC 902, also called the Farm Operating Plan, the 901, which is the entity member information of if it's like a farm business, an LLC. This isn't required for just individuals who own a piece of land. The 941, which is the AGI or Adjusted Gross Income Certification, and that has to be submitted annually for most programs after October 1st. And then the AD 1026, which covers the highly erodible land and wetland compliance certification. All of these records and documents and producer eligibility paperwork should be on file and loaded into the system, FSA systems, by close of business day on the application deadline. You may be ineligible if this does not occur. I will also note, should have noted maybe at the top, that I highly recommend to consult your local FSA service center for assistance. If you have any issues in getting in touch or figuring different questions out, please contact NRCS Oregon staff. We may be able to assist. We are not responsible for determining FSA eligibility or processing that FSA paperwork. And we are also not the experts on determining what exact information is needed. So highly recommend getting in touch with FSA. And there are resources to assist. On the right here, I've noted and linked the American Farmland Trust Entity Toolkit. They also have a specific landowner eligibility checklist that walks through some of the Farm Service Agency paperwork and steps needed. And then the Land Trust Alliance also has an entity toolkit that talks a bit about landowner eligibility. There is a caveat that I did not get to discuss at the IRA workshop, as it was unknown to me at the time. In general, so due to the expiration of the 2018 Farm Bill, which expired on September 31st of this year, FSA is currently not authorized to accept and process the AGI certification, that CCC 941, and therefore they cannot determine AGI eligibility for this fiscal year, which is required for ACEP-ALE. All landowners must be AGI eligible in the same fiscal year that they're applying for. So I should note from the top that we are essentially operating business as usual while this issue is being fixed by NRCS National headquarters. Everybody's aware of it. Everybody knows what's going on. But I do want to highlight some specific answers to questions you may have. So how should you all be working with your landowners moving forward? USDA should inform all the departments when authorization is granted from FSA to accept the CCC 941s, which should therefore be communicated out by each department as necessary. And I highly recommend applicants to consult with their local FSA service center as soon as FSA can accept those forms. And once FSA is authorized to accept those forms, applicants should help coordinate getting all their landowners that are on the deed on the application that they're working with to complete and submit their form to FSA. And an important note here is that if there are multiple members of a trust or a farm business, all of those members must complete and submit and be in an eligible status for AGI compliance in that year.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, I see some hands up. So let me
Oh, like
go
Wendy
ahead,
was
Paul.
first. Oh, this was a big deal when I was doing an application because the farm was owned by multiple family members and getting the AGI compliance, they basically had like a windfall and they were all earning way too much money to be eligible because of a windfall. And so this takes a lot of time and effort to get all the individuals. So this is not just the business, this is the individuals in the business. So you could be looking at, 20 people or something. So this is a big deal. And I recall from the previous rules, there was like an average over a few years that they were calculating AGI for people. So it's not like you can just pick a low income year or something. So and this took me a little bit by surprise and was kind of a problem, but we were looking for a workaround, which didn't feel very equitable, but that's kind of how it goes. So anyway, this is a potential problem.
Yeah, definitely flagging this, and that's why I wanted to include this. That you're correct in that they determine AGI eligibility FSA by using the last 3 fiscal years of information. So, and then they make their determination for the current fiscal year based on those last 3 fiscal years. Again, I'm not an expert, but yes, this could be a hurdle, but we are operating as is, and I do want to grow on here really quick. That any applications that are submitted or will be submitted, we're going to just continue processing, accepting them, and they'll be tentatively eligible if they meet all of the other like land eligibility criteria. And then it will be essentially tentatively eligible until AGI is determined to be eligible. So this is a national issue. This is not just an Oregon issue. So everybody will be affected, and they're not just going to cancel all the applications if AGI doesn't work out. They will. I've heard that NRCS.
How do you know that?
Well, I've heard that NRCS has waived AGI requirements in the past. And that will most likely happen if there not be some kind of agreement between FSA and the IRS to process this type of paperwork, because that's where the issue is at right now. So I don't have an exact answer, but I would hope that everything will smooth out over the next couple of months here. And Wendy, you had a hand as well.
Yeah, I had the same reaction as Paul. Basically, whoa, that could be a real problem in terms of trying to squeeze this information out of many family members. And I'm a little surprised that there's no like if it is the corporation still required to find all its shareholders? Is a limited liability company required to find all its unit holders? It just strikes me as an unusual requirement, and it seems like it could be a real hurdle.
Yeah, in general, I echo Paul in that it is difficult to, what I understand, it is difficult to kind of wrangle all those shareholders within a corporation. I don't know if, I don't think I have an exact answer to the question. But I would, if you're concerned about this, I'd be happy to get in touch with the FSA with you. And understand like the exact information or process there.
Okay, I was just thinking maybe you would say something like, "Oh, for corporations, you don't have to do this," or something. But as far as you know, there are no exemptions for any kinds of entities.
No, okay. Not that I'm aware of. Sorry.
In some respects, it's a good thing because it's trying to like not give public money to ultra wealthy people, but in practice, it's, and then in my case, it just caused the family members to start bickering. So, but anyway, it's just one of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you. No, thanks for the questions and for digging in with me there. So I do want to briefly talk about some considerations and ineligibility as they relate more so to the land, and then we'll talk about entity eligibility. So some considerations are that the land may not exceed the forest land may not exceed 2/3 of the offered easement area. There is an option to submit a waiver for that, and that is approved, if possible, by the NRCS state conservationist. And there is also a consideration that impervious surfaces may not exceed more than 2% of the offered easement area. And again, there is an option to submit a waiver there that requires approval from the state conservationist. So some ineligibility factors are, these are all in addition to the land and landowner and entity eligibility that I'll talk about, all those requirements that must be satisfied as well. Land that's ineligible includes land that's already subject to an easement or deed restriction that provides similar restoration or protection as determined by NRCS. It also includes land where the purposes of the program that would be undermined due to on-site or off-site conditions like hazardous materials. So with each application, NRCS goes out and conducts a hazmat review of the property and interviews the landowner for any known issues. And then they review that information once it's all collected. Land where NRCS determines to have unacceptable exceptions to clear title or insufficient legal access is also ineligible. Land where gas, oil, earth, or mineral rights exploration has been leased or is owned by someone other than the landowner, it can be ineligible unless NRCS determines that the third-party rights will not harm or interfere with the purposes of the ACEP-ALE program. And then finally, land is ineligible if it's already owned by a federal, state, or local government or a non-governmental organization. So moving on to entity eligibility, we'll also talk a little bit about this when I talk about the application process. But to be an entity that can participate in the program, I've noted the eligibility item on the left, and then the materials that help fulfill that item on the right. So you must be an agency of a state or local government, be a native nation, or a nonprofit, non-governmental organization. You must be organized for the purpose of land preservation, and that can include many different purposes there. But in particular, we would be looking for kind of like that farmland protection programs, which I'll talk more on the next, or actually at the bottom here. So you must have an established agricultural land protection program that purchases conservation easements. And you also must have the authority within the state of Oregon, which is spelled out within Oregon state law there, to purchase and hold easements. And then further, you must demonstrate that your entity has a commitment to the long-term conservation of ag lands. You have the capability to acquire, manage, and enforce the easements. You have staff dedicated to stewardship and monitoring. and that you satisfy the non-federal share requirements, the matching fund. And you'll see a lot of these are just, these come out as questions on the application form. So a lot of them, you're just like self-certifying a yes or no, writing how many staff you have. And then the last thing is that you must be registered with the Federal System of Award Management, or SAM, which will generate a unique entity identifier, or UEI. This used to be the DUNS number, Duns and Bradstreet, I think it was. But now with the feds have transitioned to the SAM and the UEI system. All right, going to talk a little bit about ACEP-ALE ranking criteria. So to start out, the ranking criteria is available on the NRCS Oregon ACEP-ALE webpage, which is linked here. And NRCS is required to post the ranking criteria 30 days prior to a batching cutoff date. So that means that the fiscal year 25 ranking criteria for General ACEP should be posted soon. And you can use the fiscal year 24 ranking criteria as a reference, which is available. I just included a screenshot of the website and I pointed to it there. So what is ranking criteria used for? It is used to, it is, I thought I had that on it. Okay. Basically, it's used to help determine and fund the best applications. And it's ranking criteria that's developed both at the national level and at the Oregon state level. So we have national criteria that can be at a minimum 200 points of the total, which will equate to 400 points, and the state criteria can be a maximum of 200 points. So the national criteria, like I said, it can range from 200 to all the way up to 400, depending on how the state wants to value different questions. And the state criteria can range anywhere from 0 to 200 points. Each of the criteria are featured on the next slides. They're also adapted into questions in the parcel application packet. So when you see each of the questions, they will all be featured in the application packet. So you don't have to say, well, how do I answer this question? Or how do I share this information with NRCS? They're all captured in an application packet. So we can collect all the information seamlessly. So I just took screenshots. I'm not going to go over each question individually, but I do want folks to be aware of where the ranking criteria are. So on that initial slide where I pointed out where the link is posted on the website, this is a screenshot of the actual form. If you go to page 5, the national questions start here under the program questions section, and it specifically says national ranking criteria, as you can see on the right. And then page 6 continues on with more criteria from national. And a lot of these relate to where kind of geographically and location-based questions. So are they near other protected lands? Is the parcel near another agricultural operation? What is the population density of the county that the parcel is in? And then further, the state ranking criteria from fiscal year 24 is featured on page 7. And these are criteria that's developed by the NRCS Oregon team to get at more specific conservation values or concerns that are specific to Oregon State. So you can see here things like, are they within the sage grouse action plan area, which would be southeastern Oregon for the most part. And it awards poise based on that answer. All right. I think this is a good place to pause for another couple questions. This is the remaining information I shared a lot about at the Inflation Reduction Act workshop, because the application process is the same for both. So I'm going to check the chat here. I may have seen a question. Oh no, this was just Carson. Okay. Any quick questions at all? Feel free to come off mute. And or feel free to drop if you already heard this information at the previous workshop. Okay, I'm going to continue on here. So let's talk about submitting an application. All right, so a quick overview. You have some required forms. One is called the program agreement and the parcel application. Those are two separate application documents, which I'll talk more about in a minute. We will talk about the maps required and mapping elements for those that should go on those maps. We'll talk about the process of starting from some of those initial conversations with the landowner through to submitting an application. And I'm also going to talk about from when you submit an application to your contract obligation. So funds being obligated to your contract and how that process works with it. And then I'm going to talk about how to submit an application. So we'll start out with program agreements. All ACEP-ALE transactions require the use of program agreements and parcel contracts. Program agreements essentially set out the responsibilities for NRCS and the eligible entity. There are no funds obligated to a program agreement. So entities must be deemed eligible. So all the previous information that I talked about regarding entity eligibility applies here, and therefore, once they are deemed eligible, they can establish a program agreement before any individual parcel contracts can be established. So if you're unsure if your organization or your entity has an active program agreement for ACEP-ALE, please contact the General Easements inbox there. So some of the required materials for the program agreement application include what's called the NRCS-CPA 41. This is a national standardized application form for that program agreement. You must submit proof of nonprofit organization status, whether that's bylaws or Secretary of State filing or other documents. You should also submit proof of an established agricultural land protection program that purchases conservation easements. So that may look like a mission statement, conservation plan, or annual reports. You must also submit proof of your SAM registration and write down the UEI on your application and also provide a screenshot. You must provide proof of authority to purchase and hold agricultural conservation easements. And currently this is the Oregon statute here, so just a copy of those laws. And must provide proof of signature authority. So this might be located in bylaws and articles of incorporation or meeting minutes from a board meeting. You must provide proof of filing with the Farm Service Agency. So your entity must also file with FSA, and therefore you'll obtain what's called a subprint, a skimmed subprint from your local FSA service center. And so there's more resources to learn about entity eligibility, like I talked about before, but also to kind of help walk you through the program agreement process. There is toolkits from both LTA and American Farmland Trust. And then there are some specific information regarding entity eligibility from American Farmland Trust, the second one. And then the fourth one is a CPA 41 walkthrough from the Land Trust Alliance. So once you have a program agreement, then you can move on to your parcel applications. And so parcel applications determine the eligibility of the landowner, and collect information to help NRCS rank the applications. So broadly, the required materials include the NRCS-CPA 41A, another fun document name there that is the standardized national form that we'll talk about in a moment. Oregon uses what's called a parcel application packet. This packet will be posted soon to the website for General ACEP-ALE. And there are also supplemental documentation that we'll talk more about on the following slides. And again, some resources to learn about parcel applications include the American Farmland Trust and LTA toolkits. And then there are some specific instructions to help walk you through the 41A from both the AFT and LTA. So the CPA 41A is, like I mentioned, that standard national application form used for all ACEP-ALE transaction types. And I'm not going to walk through the form in detail, but I do want to provide some tips and tricks, which are, the first one is to make sure to select the correct enrollment and transaction types. So if it's a general ALE on section 3 there in the box on the right, it might be a little small, sorry about that, but select general, or if it's a GSS, you would select that one. And then the transaction type, we have not had any buy, protect, sell applications. This is box 4 on the right. So most entities will select the standard ALE transaction. You should also select the correct land eligibility category, which I believe is on the 2nd or 3rd page of the CPA 41A. Make sure to provide accurate easement acreage to the best of your ability. If you're enrolling the entire parcel, ensure that the acreages match what FSA acres have as well. At the time of enrolling a farm into the FSA systems, they record all the acreages as well. So just make sure that they're aligned with their records. You should also provide a location coordinate within the proposed easement area. And then lastly, you should provide a best estimate of the easement value. So within reason, if there's not an appraisal yet, I recommend that you overestimate to avoid any future contract modifications. It's easier for NRCS to return excess funds if the appraisal comes in lower, but it's difficult for NRCS to obtain additional funding if the appraisal comes in higher than what you originally put on this form here. So let's talk about the parcel application. This is a form that is specific to NRCS Oregon. It collects a lot more information to help determine the eligibility and help NRCS Oregon staff rank the application appropriately. So this broadly includes an introduction letter, it includes an application checklist, it includes a parcel questionnaire, and it also includes appendices that help you fill out the form or fill out complete certain parts of the application process, and lots of hopefully helpful information that I've put in there. You might see that the parcel questionnaire contains 70 or 80 questions. Do not be concerned though if there are kind of like logic questions. So if yes, then you answer this. If no, you answer this. So you would pretty much all applicants do not answer all 80 questions on the packet. So do not be too intimidated by that. So let's talk about the supplemental required documentation. This information is located on the checklist within the parcel application packet. And so some of these forms that are required to submit in addition to the application packet and the 41A include the recorded vesting deeds that cover the entire proposed easement area. You must provide your evidence of active SAM registration, which is usually just a screenshot. You must provide your title commitment or preliminary title commitment for initial NRCS land eligibility review. You must provide your written pending offer to purchase the ALE from the landowner. You must provide your current delegation of authority and signature authority documents. And you must provide a GIS shapefile of the proposed easement boundary. Also want to talk about maps a little bit. So in general, PDFs are perfectly fine. GIS shapefiles can be submitted, but not required. Descriptions of each map are provided on the parcel application packet checklist if you're wondering what more of these are referring to. But the four main required ones are a proposed boundary map, an access map, the PLSS map, and the land cover or land use map. And I should jump back up to access to note that to please inform NRCS if the entire proposed easement area is not accessible from a public road, or the landowner's own private road. Federally managed roads such as US Forest Service or BLM lands, or other private roads may need NRCS approval of alternative legal access. So that process should be started before or during or very early on in the application process, given that can require signature from the state conservationist. So happy to talk about that more off this meeting if there are specific parcels that you're looking at that have this type of access and require just more of a conversation about what documents are needed. Regarding mapping, we currently work with a branch called the Easement Acquisitions Branch. They review all of our Oregon ALE applications, and EAB has developed mapping guidance to provide consistency for NRCS services. So NRCS uses these entity developed maps to order environmental records, searches, and other items. So having consistency across each map and proper names, proper locations identified is important so that there's no miscommunication happening internally and with you as the applicant. So this guidance is included in the parcel application packet as an appendix, and I suggest to follow all of this guidance to establish consistency across the maps. And I've included a screenshot here of both the checklist and an example map that is in the appendix. So I won't go through this in detail, but just note that it is available and happy to walk through if you have any questions about it. So awesome, congrats, you've now filled out your application. So let's look at how to submit an application. We have our first option, which is preferred and newly available. This is an electronic upload via Box. It works similar to a Google Drive that's secure in the USDA digital environment is secure. So you can request access to this a Box account through the General Easements email there. And I can get that set up for you. And then option 2 would be an email to the General Easements email. And there are instructions on how to do both of these options in the parcel application packet appendix. So let's talk about the process from this is a very simplified version of the ALE process from those initial conversations with the landowner through to application. So you first want to talk with any interested landowners and find out if they're comfortable working with the federal agency, ensuring they're willing to live with the deed restrictions, and determine whether the property meets some of that basic eligibility criteria. And I would recommend talking to NRCS about eligibility if you have any questions early on. And then from there, if you think it's a good fit, the entity would continue to conduct some of that due diligence, looking at the deed, looking at the title. And then after that, I would pause if it's all checking out, looking like it's a good fit. If you don't have a program agreement as an entity, that's when I would recommend starting your program agreement application, because that might take a little bit and you don't want to run into any hurdles down the road of establishing that program agreement. And then from there, you would work to make sure either things are updated in the FSA or established with the FSA. moving on from there, that's when you would start to fill out the application and then eventually submit it. All those materials get submitted around the fall of each fiscal year. I also want to briefly talk about what happens when you submit an application and then it moves through obligation. So when you submit, NRCS Oregon will, of course, review the application and determine land and landowner eligibility. From there, we'll conduct an on-site visit, including looking at those hazardous materials, as I mentioned earlier on. And then from there, the applications are ranked and tentatively selected for funding. After that, any unfunded or ineligible applications are deferred to the next fiscal year at this time. And tentatively selected projects undergo what's called a pre-obligation internal controls review. So that's when we start working heavily with the easement acquisitions branch, that kind of national level office that helps us review our applications. And projects that get accepted by IC review move on to parcel contract obligation and execution. And then very simplified is the last box of the acquisition process, closing the easement, and then monitoring the easement in perpetuity. I added this in last minute, actually. So I wanted to talk a little bit about monitoring. The entity is required to monitor and enforce the terms of the easement deed and submit a report to NRCS annually. So I included a screenshot of that monitoring report on the right. Monitoring and report submission must occur within the same federal fiscal year to satisfy the annual monitoring requirement. And again, the fiscal year runs from October 1 through September 31st. So just some examples of what a satisfactory monitoring report looks like is if the monitoring is conducted on, let's say, June 24th next year, and then the report is subsequently submitted on July 24th. Both of those events happened in the same fiscal year. So then that satisfies the monitoring requirement for fiscal year 25. It doesn't satisfy the monitoring requirement if the monitoring is conducted in fiscal year 25. So again, let's say June 24th, but the report is submitted on November 15th, 2025, which actually falls in federal fiscal year 2026. That monitoring requirement is not met for either fiscal year 25 nor 26. And NRCS, I do work with them to submit monitoring reminders throughout the fiscal year. And this is just a quick note that NRCS Oregon does currently award ranking points to entities that monitor and submit 95% or more of their monitoring reports each fiscal year. So that's something to note if you're not remembering to monitor or submit the report to NRCS, that it may hurt you in the following fiscal years if you are not submitting those in the application process. All right, quickly go through some resources because I realize I'm at 5 minutes about. So there are staff to assist, of course. You have myself at the bottom here. I assist with all aspects of ACEP-ALE as a partner between COLT and NRCS. Then above me is Eric Mokenberg. He's our state easement specialist, oversees both ACEP-ALE and WRE. He's currently on leave through early November, so I'm kind of the main point of contact right now. And then Aaron Kaczmarczyk is our Farm Bill conservation lead and oversees all the Farm Bill conservation programs. And I do want to shout out, Josh is here from LTA. So I did include this slide both at the last webinar and this one, that the Land Trust Alliance has a new team that's dedicated to assisting entities with one-on-one assistance on all aspects of the application process, that they're currently prioritizing land trusts or with minimal experience with NRCS programs, whether that's at the staff level or organization level. And yes, I see your comment. I'll go back in just a moment, Paul there. And then you can submit your request for services at this link. And Josh, correct me if I'm wrong there. And then I also gave a note that if you're having trouble getting assistance, like just feel free to reach out to myself or Josh directly. And quickly, with some online and print materials, we often, NRCS partners with external organizations like AFT and LTA to produce educational materials. I really like the AFT one, that's why I highlighted it there. It's written in plain language that's well understood by, I think, at a more common level. So I like the way that they've spelled things out there, and they have a specific one for landowners as well, which you are welcome to share directly with landowners. And LTA also has an entity toolkit. And then the NRCS Oregon webpage, ACEP-ALE webpage, contains all of the application documents, ranking criteria, and more. So we'll go to Q&A. I'm gonna go back to the slide here because that's what Paul said. But happy to take any questions. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing as well.
I have a question I feel I should have known long ago because I watched the last presentation too. But I don't understand the difference between the Inflation Reduction Act program and this program, because it seems like there's overlap. How do you know which one to apply to?
Yes, and that's something I probably should have included, is that by policy, every application will actually be screened if it meets the IRA priority. So the difference between the programs is really the priorities that IRA has in, there's two main priorities. So it's reducing or enrolling lands that are at high risk of conversion from grassland to non-grassland use, and then enrolling lands that are at high risk of conversion from farming use to non-farming use, essentially. And so every application, even if you don't select IRA or don't check a box that says IRA, it will be screened if it fits that priority because that money is temporary and National wants to use that funding first. And I should also note that within the next 5 or so years, up to 2031, we're really at prime time for funding easements, NRCSs, in terms of the amount of money that they have. So if any organizations are not ready right now, this application cycle, you haven't lost out. There's going to be great opportunities moving forward. So I think the next 2 fiscal years are actually going to be the highest amounts ever for easements.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And just feel free to write me if that didn't make sense in terms of like what the difference is. Ashley, you have a hand up?
Yeah, that's great to hear about the high level of resources. Has that all been allocated? So regardless of the outcome of the election, those funds would still be available?
It's a great question. I don't think I have an answer to that. I feel like the answer is yes. Maybe Josh, do you know more than I do there?
I want to say yes, but don't hold me to that. But I believe, yeah, they're all allocated through the past farm bill, which expired, but is going through continuing resolution right now. And then the Inflation Reduction Act funds were all allocated, which is the IRA funds that Matt's mentioning.
Thank you.
The $500 we need to get done before the end of the campaign.
Thanks, Josh. Sorry, didn't mean to put you too much on the spot there, but that's like a decision and policy decision much higher than me. But definitely good to know.
I have another question. I know we're running out of time, but it has to do with this. I always get confused about, these projects take so long. If you have an application with a timeline that you're anticipating and you are given you are successful, the grant is received, but then you have to get it in place and close it and you get delayed. Do you fall out of the funding cycle? And does it go on hold so you don't have to apply again? What's the consequence of getting behind?
Yeah, so the ideal, why I broke it into kind of like initial application or conversations and then application through obligation is that window from application to obligation is the time when things will get bumped out, basically. So, and that usually occurs within one fiscal year. So that's why NRCS likes to have the application period early on in the fiscal year so that we have enough time to move towards that obligation, which is generally required by the end of the fiscal year. So that obligation process essentially happens starting November 29th through September 31st of the next year. And those funds, once it gets obligated, they can't be retracted. I mean, unless certainly if there are exceptional circumstances where the easement just can't close or there are something unacceptable has happened, then yes, I would say the funds will get pulled from that. From the time of obligation to closing, NRCS parcel contracts run two fiscal years. So let's say your application, if you apply November 29th, it gets obligated September 25th, 2025. Then you have until March 31st, 2028, I believe, to close the easement. And then there's two extensions that can be granted for 2 12-month periods. That's the current Farm Bill policy, so it could change. Caveat there, I guess. So that's kind of like the broad timeline, if that makes sense. Okay. We're getting into the weeds.
Hey, Matt, I have more of a general question.
Yes.
Since I've been doing this, there's been like a handful of different state NRCS staff that have come and gone. Is there more stability in the state office now that there's more funding? I mean, do you feel like a sense of stability in the state program?
That's a good question. That's certainly a goal that I think all NRCS staff share is a goal for stability across all the programs too, all the staff levels, whether it's a field office or a state office. The state office would always love to keep people as long as they can, and that, as you said, it is an issue for kind of knowledge retention and knowledge of policy as well, and being able to communicate that policy. They are also hoping to grow staff as well. I don't know if this sort of like additional IRA funding would be able to do something like that, but there is interest in having either more coordinators like me or potentially more easement specialists, so folks above me. So, I mean, the best answer is yes, I hope so, but it's hard to say. But good questions. These are great questions. I think since we're at 3:06 here, I think we can close it out. Thanks so much for your attention today, and this will be recorded, so feel free to refer back to it. And as always, you saw our contact info there, so you're definitely welcome to reach out anytime.
Thank
Josh,
you.
did you?
I just wanted to say thanks, Matt.
Oh, okay.
Thanks,
Of
Matt.
course.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.